Amen. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the sanctuary here at First Pilgrim Calvary, a missionary Baptist church. Tonight rather, we are honored to have sharing with us on tonight Dr. Theron McCormick. He is here on tonight to help us to kind of shed some awareness and provide some information to us concerning the COVID-19 vaccines. We know that the vaccines have raised a lot of questions within our community, within our church. And we've actually been blessed to have a large percentage of our membership be vaccinated already. But we want to, for the purpose of information, help those know the difference between the myths and the facts as it relates to these COVID vaccines. So, want to welcome you all again to our sanctuary for what we call community convos, community conversations, because these are conversations that I believe that as a church and as a community we must have for the betterment of our people. So, Dr. McCormick, I would ask at least that you would at least just give us some general background on who you are, what you do within your career as a doctor.
Well, I grew up in this area. My father's Gregory McCormick, and my family was raised in this church until I moved away and went off to college. And I trained at LSU, Texas Children's Hospital for pediatric allergy and immunology. And I've been a practicing allergist in the greater Baton Rouge area for more than 10 years now. And so one of my specialties is taking care of patients with compromised immune systems, vaccine-related incidents, also allergic conditions as well. So I do have a lot of experience with these things, and I'm blessed and honored to be here. So this type of topic is one of my near and dear to my heart, and so I think it's important for people who do the job that I do to kind of be a voice.
Right, and and thank you for that. Another one of the reasons that I want to clarify behind this particular broadcast is that I don't want you all to feel as though we are trying to pressure you into going and get the vaccine, and then in the same manner, we don't want you to feel as though we're trying to scare you into not getting it. Ultimately, our goal is to just provide you all with some information, some valuable information, so that you can make an informed decision. That you're not just saying, "Hey, I'm not going to get it because I don't know what's in it," or "I'm not going to get it because it's going to put a chip in me," and different things like that. We want to give you some solid information so that we can make sure that you're making informed decisions when you go out to get the vaccine, or if you choose not to go get it. So on tonight also, I want to encourage you that if you have any questions for Dr. McCormick on tonight, that you would put them in the comment section. I'm monitoring the comment sections on all of the streams on my phones, and then we have Brother Brown in the back. He's also monitoring some of the comments. So we want to answer some of your questions as well as we get into this informational session on tonight. So, Dr. McCormick, could you give us just a few details that you may know, or that you know rather, about the two vaccines that are currently being distributed following the FDA's emergency use approval?
Yes, thank you. And just to echo what you mentioned earlier, it's not designed to force anyone or to twist any arms. It really is an informational session to try and make sure that you have all the tools that you need to make a really informed decision, which a lot of times patients don't have the luxury to do so. So it's really good that the population in this church have taken upon themselves to get that vaccine already. The two vaccines that are FDA approved that have their emergency use authorization are the Moderna vaccine, as well as the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, I should say. And I will tell you, both of them have equal efficacy, meaning they're equally good in producing a really good response and protection against COVID-19. Protection meaning that they're less likely to have COVID-19, have a significant issue with it, be hospitalized, or even have a death as a result. So it's excellent protection.
Gotcha.
Just to let you know that. And then there are others in development, but those are the two that are available right now in widespread use.
Okay. And one of the biggest controversies that I've seen surrounding the current vaccines, whether they've been approved, being used, or are still in the production process, is the time frame. Is there any information that you can give us as it relates to some of the research that's been used in producing the current vaccines? Because one of the greatest questions, once again, is that how, with the pandemic beginning, mid-March of last year, how were they able to I think the terminology that they were using were warp speed or speed warp, something like that. How were they able to produce these vaccines at such a fast rate, or at such a short time frame?
It's probably the number one question. So thank you for asking. I will tell you that you're right. The name warp speed is a little bit of a misnomer, and I think if they had to do it again, they wouldn't use that frame because it kind of connotes cutting corners,
Right. Okay.
where that really wasn't the case.
Okay.
Coronavirus, the COVID-19 vaccine, virus that we are talking about, has been sequenced by the Chinese as well as other leading organizations in the world who helped us out with trying to make sure that we know the genetics of that virus. And so that technology to produce what they call an mRNA vaccine has been in place for about 10 years. Okay. So they already had like a plug and play type of system.
Okay.
So once they had that in place, which would make this distinctively different from other vaccine development, is the fact that they had that plug and play ready. Then number two, they had all the available resources around the world, including finances, to run things simultaneously, as opposed to one private organization making a vaccine going very slow, which can take 3 to 8 years. Right. This one was able to be developed inside of a year when you have all hands on deck.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I found in my research was the importance of collaboration amongst nations, amongst organizations to develop the vaccine, because a lot of people compare it to the flu vaccine. They will say, hey, the flu vaccine is tweaked every year, and they're still studying that. So how is it that we got the COVID vaccine? And, that was one of the differences that I found in research was a lot of journalists noted the fact that with the flu vaccines, you had a lot of organizations say, hey, we're going to make our vaccine, you make your vaccine. We're going to do our research, you do your research. Whereas with this one, with COVID, because of the pandemic, I guess you can say, they said, hey, let's collaborate so we can try to put it into this pandemic as fast as we can. So that's one of the things that one of the questions that I really wanted answered on tonight, to kind of debunk that claim that, hey, they just pulled this vaccine out of the sky somewhere. But like Dr. McCormick specified, that it's based on a lot of research that has been in development over years, over more than at least 10 years.
More than 10 years.
So we want to let you all know that too. It's not just something that was developed within a few months. It's based on information and research that's been gathered for more than 10 years. Right. So that's one of the things that we want to help God's people understand on tonight. So I'm going to go to the comment section now so that we can answer some of these questions. Sister Letitia Polar, she asked the question. There are two questions. So I'm going to get both of her questions out, or at least three. I'm sorry, her three questions out real quick. Number one, how should a person with allergies take the vaccine? And I know this is your area of specialty because Dr. McCormick is an allergist. So how should one with allergies go about taking the vaccine?
Well, patients with allergies, and depends upon whatever allergic condition they may have, be it asthma, eczema, or significant food allergy, or just frequent nasal symptoms, they are at no increased risk as opposed to other patients who don't have those symptoms regarding the vaccine. So what we tell people is you should have the vaccine, and that shouldn't be an indication for you not to. Okay. Now, if you've had a history of allergic reactions to vaccines in the past, that may be a different story that you may want to discuss with your doctor or with your allergist to decide whether or not your type of reaction predisposes or makes it easier for you to have a reaction with this vaccine.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's one of the one of the issues when the vaccine first came out. Um, we know how the media can spin stuff, and we would see how they would, out of hundreds of people that may have taken it, they would broadcast the fact that, hey, maybe 2 or 3 people had a bad reaction or maybe even passed away. So can you talk about some of the side effects that people have experienced as a result of the vaccine? We've had members even that have, kind of told me how, hey, Pastor, after my second dose, I ran a fever. I experienced some soreness in the injection site. So can you kind of give us some background or some details about some of the side effects?
Absolutely. I think it's important for us to know the risk as well as the benefits of the vaccine. So the risk are having those side effects. And luckily, as with most vaccines, these 2 vaccines that are approved right now have not had more than the typical type of reaction that you see than with other, say, childhood vaccines or routine vaccines that individuals receive as adults. With that said, you can see that about 80% of people will have some degree of arm soreness or some site redness or some irritation, and it'll just feel uncomfortable.
Right.
But that second dose, especially when you're giving it at 3 weeks for one vaccine, 4 weeks for the other vaccine, that second dose, after the immune system has been introduced with that previous dose, kind of getting the troops ready to understand what's going on, now they're mobilizing and they're really inducing what we call an immune system response that's going to confer really good protection.
Okay.
When it does that, that can produce fever, that can produce feeling run down, fatigue, or what patients would think of as flu-like symptoms.
Okay.
And so that can go on for more than 24 to 36 hours, again, depending upon the patient.
Right.
But it doesn't happen to every single patient.
Right.
And so it is an expected side effect, and those who don't have those conditions, those symptoms, doesn't necessarily mean that their immune system isn't working. It's just that it is an individual response.
Gotcha.
But it's still a better deal than not having the vaccine.
Gotcha.
Especially in population or people of color.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we addressed. And then Sister Letitia Polar, she also asked the question: does the vaccine is there a vaccine for youth under the age of 16 yet?
Not as of yet. Pfizer, BioNTech, and some of the other vaccine manufacturers right now, they're already starting 12 and older.
Okay.
Enrolling them in studies right now.
Gotcha.
And we expect to see some of that data in early summer, June or July, to be able to give that information. So they're enrolled those patients, they're already receiving the vaccines, and they're waiting on that data. So we'll have more information later.
Okay. And she also asks, does the vaccine prevent transmission?
That's an excellent question. So right now, as it stands, we know that there is likely some degree of protection against transmission, but it is not fully vetted throughout all of the studies.
Okay.
So we suspect, based on data that, and we've seen this recently, that patients who received either the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, either one of those, that there has been what they call neutralizing antibodies that are produced. Okay. And so their transmission to other individuals has been less. And again, but that data is still accumulating.
Okay.
So among scientists who are doing a lot of the research, they believe in general that there is protection, but they're a little hesitant to say absolutely. So because ultimately we still are in a setting where we have to practice routine mitigation measures, wearing the mask, 6 feet, distancing, and as well as wearing personal protective equipment when available.
Gotcha. Okay. Sister Rebecca Labo, she asked the question, hi, Dr. McCormick, with the different strains of COVID out there, how effective is this vaccine?
That's another question, one of the most hot questions right now. And to repeat it is, the current vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, are they protective against the new strains? And they're testing those constantly as we speak. And we're seeing anywhere between 60 to 70% production of antibodies that are what we call neutralizing, or able to fight against it. But again, it depends upon the vaccine. Like one vaccine may do it a little bit better than the other, Moderna versus Pfizer. Right. Bottom line is there's going to be some protection. Could it be as foolproof as we would like? Again, that would be individual, and as well as the individual who has whatever underlying health conditions. Gotcha. But it is as good as we can get right now. And we still tell people who've received both doses of either vaccine that they should continue to do those routine practices of protection.
Okay. And also, one of the questions that I would ask also, and once again, I'm encouraging all of you who have questions as it relates to the COVID vaccines that you would ask them in the comments. We're monitoring the comment sections for all of you who may have questions. Feel free to ask them. This is an open session. We want to make sure that you are informed, make sure that you're receiving what it is that you need to receive. So, one of the questions that I would ask is how. Um, with those with you all still encouraging those who become even fully vaccinated to continue in their routine mitigation measures like wearing a mask, practicing social distancing. We know that part of the vaccine or having the large majority of the population vaccinated is in support of the idea of herd immunity, correct?
Correct.
How long, or I'll ask like this: at what percentage of the population, needs to be vaccinated for us to return to some sense of normalcy, and to start to slowly move away from those routine mitigation measures?
Okay, so this is where the statistics can be a little daunting. We have over 330 million Americans in the United States ish. Let's just say that. And we're looking at numbers anywhere between 75 to 80% of them being vaccinated.
Okay.
Now, that is a huge ask, especially when we only get about 40 to 50% of our citizens in this country getting the influenza vaccine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and we still have that level of protection. But what I will tell you is we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, people of color, particularly the Black population, we're lagging behind others
Right.
as far as vaccine uptake or being able to have it and receive it. And that's an issue. That's why one of the reasons why I'm here to kind of answer these questions, because we want to increase that. Black Americans make about 14% of the population. Hispanic Americans, Latino Americans, 18%.
Right.
And so even if all, let's say, white Americans were to get vaccinated, every single one in the United States, we'll still get up to about 60%. So still
Right.
not enough.
Right.
So we have to do our part, not miss our place in line, get those vaccines in, ask those questions when appropriate. So if you have concerns or questions, so we can cross that bridge, so we can do our part, because ultimately we want to get to that point where we don't have to do these strategies as
Correct.
often.
Gotcha. Also, we would ask the question, Brother Terrence Brown asked the question: should someone that has previously tested positive for COVID-19 take the vaccines?
The answer is yes. So 2 reasons, one of which is, yes, you can have COVID more than once. There have been reports of that. That's in the scientific literature. We do see that. And 2, there are some variants out there. But another reason is because you want to make sure that you have all the protection that you have. The antibodies that a body produces after having natural COVID, the COVID-19, and being symptomatic can give you some degree of protection for about 3 to 6 months or so. Getting the vaccine can boost that significantly and give you additional protection even more so. And so, again, not just having the vaccine is not enough, or having had it. You want to make sure the timing of it is. So I will tell you, that's another point that a lot of people want to ask: what's the timing of having COVID and then having the vaccine? You can't afford to wait a good 3 to 6 months. That can happen after having COVID before considering yourself if you're in that eligible population to get the vaccine. But I will tell you, you want to get it because it can give you that extra protection.
Right. Okay. And I think another thing worth noting also is the difference between age groups. So for some reason, I've been seeing a lot of questions about whether or not the younger generation, teens, even those in their early 20s, people have that big. I don't want to call it a misconception, because I'm not sure if it's factual or not, that they are the greatest group of asymptomatic carriers of the virus. Now, like I said, it may just be something that people are saying in their everyday to day lives, but are you all seeing any correlation between those who have had COVID that get the vaccine and show side effects to the vaccine in comparison to those who've never tested positive for COVID and get the vaccine?
I see. So if I'm getting the question correctly, if you've had COVID and had the condition COVID-19, not just the infection, which is asymptomatic, but having the condition itself, and then you happen to receive the vaccine, which we're recommending that they do, are they at increased risk for having a reaction?
Right.
The answer is no.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, the immune system, when it gets revved up trying to produce antibodies and respond to a vaccine,
Right.
there could be some degree of, let's say, fever, chills, minor symptoms, but not the actual COVID-19 or a resurgence of what they had previously.
Right.
So not necessarily so.
Okay. Yeah, and that was one of the things too. I had a peer tell me that she was blessed to be able to receive the vaccine because of her profession, and she said she experienced some of the side effects to getting the vaccine after her second dose, but she said that let me backtrack and say she was one who had COVID.
Yes.
And she said that she would still rather the brief side effects that she had after the vaccine than to experience the symptoms that she did for 2 weeks with actually having COVID.
Yes.
So that was one of the things that was worth noting as well. Another question is, why do you experience chills, feeling bad, fever, and tiredness after the second dose? And I think we kind of answered that earlier, but there's maybe someone that chimed in earlier. So
it's a common question, and I will tell you, first, when you have the first dose of the vaccine, similar to infants receiving childhood vaccinations, the body is naive to receiving something like that. So it presents it to the body, the immune system, their cells that are already there, they produce response. Okay, now we kind of got an idea what this COVID-19 virus looks like. Okay. Right. So now then you get that booster. Once you get that booster vaccine, then the body's like, okay, we've seen this before. Now we rev up, we produce more cells, we produce more chemicals and mediators to try and help us fight off things. So I call it mobilizing the troops. But in doing so, it can cause a person to feel chills, feel irritated, feel fatigued.
Okay.
And so it's a sign, to tell you the truth, that the immune system is doing its job.
Right. Okay. And like you said earlier, that's if you don't experience it, it doesn't necessarily mean that your immune system isn't working.
Correct. Absolutely. Every immune system is different.
Right. Okay. And another question is, after getting the second vaccine, will we need to get a third 6 months or a year later? Or I guess the question would be after you are fully vaccinated, because we know it takes 2 doses to be fully vaccinated. How effective is the immunity that the first vaccine brings? Kind of like the flu shot. They recommend you get a flu shot every year, right?
Yes.
So when could we look at having to take or have to be fully vaccinated again with the COVID vaccine?
Well, it's an interesting question, because right now we're still gathering good information and trying to make that decision, as far as the scientists who are in charge are trying to make those determinations on what's the timing on if we need another vaccine or booster. I will tell you, there is a lot of leading thought that we may at some point need it in the fall or winter, need another vaccine similar to the flu vaccine. The reason being is something called, if you're a science person, antigenic shift. Essentially, the proteins on the virus themselves can move or shift and be different. And so they can be more infective for some people. We call it more infectious, I would say. But we're still trying to figure that out. And this is one of the reasons why year after year, we always have coronaviruses. Right. This one is just a much more special, much more difficult to handle, and a much more dangerous one.
Okay. Another question is also, are there any future side effects that physicians, scientists are anticipating maybe as a result of the COVID vaccine outside of what we've already been seeing, such as, fever, chills, and soreness?
Well, it's an excellent question. I think one of the things you have to remember is that the virus, the vaccines that we're using right now is an mRNA vaccine. So once it does its initial part, it dissolves within 5 to 7 days or so. It is out of your system. It is nothing lingering. There's no virus in your body.
Okay.
So what you're left with is the immune system response. So the overwhelming majority of patients who receive the vaccine will have some lasting immune system response to that.
Gotcha.
Some with a minor response, some not so strong or robust. Again, depending upon the patient and their underlying health conditions.
Okay.
Now, the other component to that, which is another piece to it, is that vaccine sometimes can change over time, and so we have to be a little careful with it. But
Okay.
I think we've done what we needed to do with regarding this.
Okay, I got you. Another question was exactly after being fully vaccinated, why why do we still have to follow those routine mitigation measures? So we know we do have to, even after being fully vaccinated, but why? What's the reasoning behind, if you're fully vaccinated, still having to wear a mask and social distance?
That's an excellent question as well. I think the one reason is because same reason we're wearing masks, because we're not just protecting ourselves, we're protecting our loved ones.
Okay.
Everyone here, and those of you who are part of the audience, may have loved ones who may have some underlying health conditions. And when we say underlying health conditions, we mean things like high blood pressure, diabetes, those of them that may be overweight, also having chronic kidney disease. These are things which can increase their risk for having a really bad outcome, meaning hospitalization, ICU stay, and even death if they have these type of conditions.
Right.
So you really want to be careful to make sure that you are protecting those populations and not only just yourself. So remember, it goes back also to herd immunity. Herd immunity is very important. So if you and I receive the vaccine and we have 10 or 12 other people out here who don't, and we decide to not wear the mask, we're not doing our part at this point. We're still trying to get everyone to do it as much as possible. And once we reach that number, then we can relax these other precautions like wearing masks and things like that.
Okay. So kind of piggybacking on that question, is it possible, I'm trying to think of how to word it, and it's just out of curiosity. Is it possible that even if I'm fully vaccinated, that I could, because the purpose of the vaccine is to build my immune system's response to that virus, right?
Correct.
So does that disqualify me as being a carrier, where I can still transmit it to someone else who has not been fully vaccinated?
Not necessarily. We're not all the way sure on that information. We still, like, you can be an asymptomatic carrier and not have COVID disease and things like that and be fully vaccinated.
Okay.
We still believe that is the case. We're also saying that is unlikely.
Okay.
But it's still possible.
Okay. So that's part of the reason why we still have to
wear the mask
to prevent.
And the social distancing.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Also, should someone who's maybe having a sinus, cold, or even flu or COVID-like symptoms take the vaccine? So let's say you're scheduled Monday to get the vaccine, but you start experiencing COVID, flu, or cold-like symptoms before you go and get the vaccine. Should I still go and take it, or should I wait until I get better?
I would encourage them to probably wait until they recover from those symptoms and get that place back in line. Let whoever's providing the vaccine know that, so they can reserve or hold the vaccine for you, so that they won't lose their spot in line per se.
Okay. Also, Sister Cynthia Moses asks us the question, if you experience some of the symptoms with the first shot, so if you experience any symptoms after your first dose, what may happen the second time around? Does that make you more susceptible to experiencing symptoms the second time around?
Another great question. What I will tell you is that if you reacted to the first one, again, depends upon the reaction or the symptoms that you were referring to. So if the symptoms were just soreness or irritation of the arm, then yes, you can see something similar to that. If you're talking about something like fatigue, feeling run down, those minor flu-like symptoms, the answer is yes, you can see those on the second time go around. Now, you can take some medication for that. So if you're able to take acetaminophen, Tylenol, or ibuprofen, or things like that, immediately after you get that vaccine that second time, that is okay to do. And I will tell you, the best way to do that is to take it immediately thereafter, and then again 8 hours later. Do it scheduled whether you feel bad or not, and that significantly reduces the chances of those side effect symptoms.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And also, Sister Rebecca asks, she says, did you? Oh, okay. Could wearing a mask cause future breathing or other health issues, and how effective is wearing the mask?
Excellent question. I think this is something that comes up all the time regarding mask wearing, because I'll be honest, it's a major inconvenience for all Americans, and some people take to it better than others. It's the truth. I think Unfortunately, a lot has been made about whether or not it's been effective or not. I will tell you that wearing a mask, one mask that can filter out respiratory viral particles, is better than not wearing a mask. I mean, remember, it's not just you, it's you're protecting your loved ones as well. Now, if you have respiratory conditions, we've got good studies to say that even if I had asthma or emphysema or things of that nature, significant lung issues, I can still wear a mask and it not necessarily compromise my
Right.
oxygen. Now, there will be some people when things are over their face that they will just feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And
Right.
so we invite those people to really try and find a mask or covering that they feel comfortable with
Right.
and go along with the plan for not just themselves, but for
Right.
others.
Right. And I think ultimately it goes back to also, kind of what happened during the first round of the COVID mitigation measures going out when we were kind of in phases, which we're
Yes.
still in phases, but not so much because they're kind of mixing phases now, doing modified phases and different things like that. But I think ultimately the purpose is that um, with it being a pandemic, is to avoid being around people as much as you can in the first place.
Yes.
And so, I would suggest, at least not being a medical professional or anything like that, but I would suggest also if you have health issues that would make it hard for you to wear a mask, that you would find ways to avoid being around people, from the beginning, that you don't have to wear a mask for a long period of time that could contribute to, you having some discomfort dealing with some of those health issues. So,
I would agree. I think you just mentioned those are called, that's why we call it mitigation measures.
Right.
It's not just wearing the mask, it's being socially conscious,
Yeah.
the 6 foot difference, and being and using antiseptics, using antimicrobials, antiviral things that can wipe surfaces. These are all helpful. But
Right.
again, when you can avoid being in large crowds and large gatherings, and you know you have underlying health conditions, and you know you have difficulty wearing a mask, that's being smart.
Right, right. And here's another thing too. Mr. Donia just asked a question. Dr. McCormick, he did mention earlier in the broadcast that yes, if you've had COVID once, you can have it more than once. So we don't know the percentage of people that have
That's
caught
correct.
it again, but there have been documented cases where
That's correct.
people have had COVID more than once. Another question that I have is how does the what are the recommendations for those who have the underlying health conditions that make them more at risk for catching COVID? What are the suggestions for them as it regards to taking the vaccine? Because, prime example, I have a great grandmother that has diabetes, high blood pressure, heart condition, different things like that, and we've been kind of skeptical because of the side effects of the vaccine on whether or not we should have her vaccinated, because we're not sure if the side effects would contribute to the underlying health conditions that she currently has already. So what would be your recommendation for someone who has those underlying health conditions as it regards to taking the vaccine?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's good that they're having these questions and not just going to those one-off questions or one-off persons in their lives and say, look, I heard of so and so, I heard of so and so, because anything sensationalized will grab more attention as opposed to the hundreds and thousands of people who've received the vaccine who've not had these issues, and these are patients or people who've had underlying conditions. So when
Right.
they did the studies with the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna, they had patients who were enrolled who had underlying cardiovascular issues, underlying lung issues, hypertension. Those are the everyday people, is what we're saying. But when you're dealing with patients who have, like that loved one you just mentioned, who may be over 65, who may have underlying health conditions, just like you mentioned, this is the population who needs to be at the front of the line,
Right.
because they are most at risk for
Right.
having a really bad outcome
Right.
in the unfortunate event should they get infected.
I got you.
So, and I will tell you, and I know this is not necessarily something that's just completely focused on people of color, but our Black Americans are significantly more likely, meaning 60 to 70% of the deaths that have happened from COVID-19 have happened in the Black community.
Wow.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. And when you think about And I really want you all to put that into perspective. Yesterday, the president came and he, paused the nation to remember 500,000 people that have passed away as a result of COVID-19. Anywhere between, what's the percentage?
Yeah, 60 to 80% of people of color.
Yeah.
A good 60% of them are Black Americans.
Yeah. So out of that 500,000, 60 to 80% of that have
died. 60 to 80% of those who died
have been
people of color.
Been people of color. So that's a great number. That's a big number. Not a great number. That's a big number of people. So we want to. That's why we're having these sessions and these sit downs. Brother Terrence asked the question: did any of the companies include the African American population specifically in their research? Before releasing it into the vaccines, since we are at a higher risk, were they included in the research and in the testing for the current vaccine?
Yes, and the answer is yes. And so, could it have been at a much higher number? The answer is also yes. But I will tell you, anytime you have more than 14 to, let's say, 20% of your population that you're testing, having some degree of participation in the original studies, that's useful information, especially when you take into account that we only represent, what I mean by we, African Americans only represent about 14% of the population in the United States. So it's relatively representative, but we are still disproportionately hit by infections as well as death.
And Sister Letitia Polo also asks, what is the best tool for building immunity, I guess, outside of the COVID vaccine? What are some things that you would recommend to help? Because I believe we all can do something in addition to getting the vaccine to build our immune systems to protect against viruses and other bacteria and different things like that.
That's an excellent question. I would say that it's the general things that we want to do to keep our immune system as robust as possible. So if I have underlying medical conditions, I want to make sure I'm having regular medical visits with my healthcare professional, taking the medications that have been prescribed and that are appropriate for me. And if I have questions about them, bring that up with my healthcare professional. Really tap that relationship. Number two, I want to make sure I get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Because it's oftentimes overlooked that if many people do not get enough sleep at nighttime, so average adult needs about 7 hours of sleep a night. So think about how many people don't receive that. So it does sap your immune system when your body does not get the adequate rest that it needs.
Yeah.
Third, eat right. So you want to try and eat a balanced diet as often as possible. We're all on the go these days, and sometimes we don't stop and think about how balanced our diet needs to be. Which brings me to my last piece, which would be whether or not supplements would be an issue or a concern. Like, I'm going to go and take this vitamin C, I'm going to take this vitamin D and things of that nature. I will tell you, there have been recent studies that have come out. I just had one that this last week that was published in the JAMA open source medical journal, looking at over 200 something Americans who were taking either vitamin C and or vitamin D and taking it in decent quantities, and whether or not that increased or gave them additional protection with regular day-to-day. And the answer is no protection more than general Americans not taking it.
Okay.
So my point is, do those general things to keep yourself safe and robust as possible. Do the social distancing, keep those hands washed, and then vaccinate when you can make sure that that's what you do.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Another question that I would ask also, I'll ask, Terrence also asked the question, how did medical professionals come up with the 6 feet versus 7 feet or even 8 feet or less than 6 feet? So how did they come up with 6 feet social distancing rather than more than 6 feet or less than 6 feet?
That's a great question as well. I would just say this. Typically when you're speaking, respiratory droplets like actual virus can be in saliva that spits out of our mouth, even though we are not seeing it. Goes about 6 feet.
Okay.
Now, if I'm yelling or I'm at a ball game or I'm screaming and things like that, it will go to 7 to 10.
Right.
So there's good data to suggest even a singing choir that's 12 feet away can put droplets on you. And so this is one of the reasons why with routine speak, when people are not yelling, it's about 6 feet. So that's why they came up with that
routine.
Number.
Okay. Gotcha. And also I would ask the question, I think one of the things that a lot of people got wind of the flu vaccines, that flu vaccines inject you with a little bit of the flu.
I see.
So a lot of people are hesitant about COVID vaccines because they feel to believe that, especially with the side effects, they are automatically, their minds go to say, hey, they must be injecting me with some of the COVID or some of the coronavirus.
I see.
So is that factual as it relates to COVID? And if so, if you are being injected with the coronavirus, how does that aid in um, um, helping us build immunity?
I see. So the question for us is about that virus, about the vaccine development, and I will tell you, short answer is no. There's no coronavirus in the coronavirus vaccine.
Gotcha.
There is genetic material
Okay.
called mRNA, which is used to make some portion of a protein similar to the virus itself.
Okay.
So we make an immune response to that. So no, the coronavirus does not contain a live version of coronavirus. The vaccine does not contain live coronavirus or inactivated coronavirus like some vaccines do.
Okay.
So
Okay. And I think we're not getting many more questions, so we'll kind of wrap it up at this. It's been a good informational 45-minute session thus far. But my last question would be also as it relates to any severe reactions that you have heard of so far to the vaccines, even deaths related to the vaccines, because even once again, sensationalism.
That's
We've
right.
seen a few cases where the media will report, hey, such and such died 2 days after receiving this vaccine, but hasn't been confirmed by an autopsy that it was a result
Correct.
of the vaccine. But automatically, you feed that to the public. They're going to say, hey, he had to die from the vaccine. What's the coincidence that he
Yes.
got it and 2 days later he died? So based on some of that information that you may have, or any cases where you've seen severe reactions or even death, how does that compare to the number of people that have successfully taken the vaccine and even with experiencing any side effects have recovered, been fine after, and still making progress?
Yeah, it's probably one of the more important questions I receive, and because as a physician, we're faced with really trying to untangle the difference between something causing something or something just happening at the same time. We call correlation.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's difficult. And so you're right. We've given the vaccine over 20 million people. We'll continually increase that number all the time. And the list of reactions per dose, there's been about significant reactions have happened at about 4.5 times per million doses given. Like there's 4.5 cases per million.
Okay.
And that's typically what we see with other traditional vaccines. So it's not out of the ordinary.
So these are things that y'all have seen even with flu vaccines,
Absolutely.
vaccines that we all receive yearly.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so and again, this is not, like you mentioned, it's not brought to people's attention because the power of one person's story can really influence individuals.
Yeah.
Like I know someone who had the vaccine and they had a really bad outcome. They were in the hospital. So 2 and 2 together, when you don't know that person's underlying health condition, you don't know if that person was already ill before they received the vaccine.
Right.
So none of the information is disclosed. So yes, they're looking at that 110, 112 deaths within that 5 to 7 days of receiving the vaccines that have been given in this country. And over 65% of those have happened in nursing homes. And with that particular case, even that small percentage that's in those homes, they still, like you mentioned, have yet to link. Now, there's no cover up. This is like, what's the cause? Is it a true cause?
Right.
Like when you're dealing with epidemiology, which is the study of how things develop, especially viruses, it's very hard to say this happened because of this.
Right. Okay.
It's more like there's a high chance that this happened in relationship to this.
I got you.
And there really is a difference.
Okay. So once again, we want to thank all of you all for tuning in tonight. Let's just to give a quick recap of some of the general themes that we want to make sure you all know on tonight. Number one, I would say would be the fact that this was not a vaccine that was just developed out of nowhere. That's been one of the greatest causes of confusion, and one of the greatest causes of people being hesitant to engage in conversations about the vaccine, is that we all believe that, hey, they started in March and it came out in December. The vaccines that are currently in production still and that have been approved for emergency use have been in development for more than 10 years, based on information that's been gathered rather for more than 10 years.
Correct.
That's number one. Number two, that we talked about some of the side effects that, they are only, it's not that the vaccine is causing anything, rather, it's just your immune system's response to it, which is normal for anything. Anything that affects your immune system is going to cause your immune system to generate a response, correct?
And if I will, just one quick piece, I would say that you're 5 times more likely to get coronavirus and have a really bad outcome, meaning be hospitalized or possibly die, as opposed to having something like the vaccine causing local side effects.
Right.
So it really is a risk versus benefit type of thing.
Right.
And I can tell you, in the overwhelming majority of cases, the benefit of having protection against the virus far outweighs that 1 to 2, 3 days of being uncomfortable that we typically see with vaccines, showing that your immune system is working.
Right. And one more question. I think this is important. Terrence just asked, and then we'll wrap up. Is how long should someone wait to get the vaccine after recovering from major surgeries or illnesses? So, if you've just had open heart surgery or something major like that, any type of invasive procedure, how long do you think that individual should wait before they take the vaccine?
I'm going to be honest. I think it will be an individual case. I think depending upon how significant the issue was, meaning the illness, if I'm recovering from a significant illness, then your doctor, who you want to have this involved in this conversation, let them know, because you can have it as early as 2 to 4 weeks after a vaccine, after an incident. But most medical professionals will probably say wait a month.
Okay. Good. And also, we want to remind everyone that this stream will be up for forever. It's going to stay on our Facebook pages, on our YouTube accounts. So if you have any other further questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I have no problem getting in contact with Dr. McCormick to get some of those answers for you. But ultimately, we hope that we were able to provide you with some information for you to make whatever decision that you're going to make. But understand that it's better to be informed than to be misinformed. And I think it's a blessing that we were able to have. I say a homeboy because he was raised up here in First Pilgrim Calvary. He's a native of this area. His dad and his mom are still members here.
Yes.
And then ultimately, he's a black man. I want you all to see that the information that we are receiving can come from someone within our community, someone who understands our struggles, understands where we're coming from, to let you know what it is that you need to know. So once again, Dr. McCormick, we want to thank you on tonight. We wish you well in your career going forward. We know you've had much success already, but we thank God for you. We praise God for you. And once again, I'm praying for you, First Pilgrim Calvary. Want to remind you, tomorrow night we will be back here for revival. We'll have Pastor Brandon Collins sharing with us on tomorrow from Baton Rouge. So tune in, join in, however you want to worship with us. We want to welcome you. God bless you all. God keep you all is our prayer. Thank y'all for tuning in on tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.